World Regions Geography, East Asia, Part 3. The Chinese Empire, Silk Road, and the Great Wall. You can kind of see here, this is the Great Wall stretching along here, and it was built to block tribes in this region, Mongols, Tartars, and other tribes from coming down into China and raiding the rich agricultural land of China. You can see the various dynasties, Shang Dynasty, all the way to the Han Dynasty. Right through here, Shang Dynasty is a central part here. The two major rivers, both flowing out of the Himalayas. The third major river here, you see the Qin Dynasty. So this is the first dynasty. This plus this is the second dynasty. This plus the green is the third, and then the fourth dynasty. The fourth dynasty takes in this whole region here. So it gives you an idea. Here's the Silk Road beginning here and heading out across Central Asia on the northern side of the Himalayas and through the this is Afghanistan here, northern Pakistan, what they call the Kush, which is the Himalaya region that separates India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Now the Japanese Empire. The Japanese Empire was historically formed around the introduction of Buddhism. So up until that time, there really wasn't an empire, but it was Buddhism. One of the things that's unique, I think, about a lot of empires is they need a religion in order to kind of form around whatever that religion happens to be. In Persia, I think there was Zoroastrianism, different regions, different religions, but the political formation and the religious formation seem to go hand in hand. Now, Buddhism arrived in Japan indirectly. It came out of India, went into China, and then into Korea, and then because of trade between Korea, China, and Japan, you had this exchange of ideas, and Buddhist monks arrived and created, introduced Buddhism, and then Shintoism, the Japanese version of that, became the dominant religion in Japan. There are a lot of Buddhists, Shintos, and Christians in Japan. Power was centralized in the emperor in about the 6th century. The original capital and home of the Imperial Japanese family was Kyoto. It was much later that it was moved under the shogunate to Tokyo. And Japan developed a unique feudal system, similar in concepts and approach to feudal systems in Europe, but with some significant differences. And one major difference is that feudal system hung around until some people say even after World War II, but certainly until and through World War II, the Japanese military very much followed the feudal system and the concepts and ideas that were put forth by the feudal system in Japan. Japan's feudal system, unlike the European system, was initially focused inwardly rather than on outward expansion. So it was really about control of land within Japan, and a feudal system is always based on land ownership and fealty to the landowner. And then you have a warrior class, which in Japan was the samurais, in Europe it was the knights. You have your emperor, you have the shogun, you have other royals. Now, the collapse of these empires is kind of interesting because both the Chinese and the Japanese empires collapsed. They collapsed at different times, but in the case of Japan, it was rather sudden, the end of World War II, and with the Chinese, it was a long, drawn-out affair. So imperial decline was a long-term process rather than a sudden event. Even in Japan, there was a collapse, and then all of a sudden, a rapid industrialization, a little different than China. We'll go into these two different ones, the way it was handled. A lack of technology in general is what led to the collapse and the decline. Western expansion, so you had Europeans, you had Americans, you had those groups coming into China in particular. Throughout Asia was the age of colonialism. So the Western countries with vastly superior military technology and industrial technology would show up and enforce their policies on Japan and in China, and then in the case of Japan, it was the U.S. with Commodore Perry showing up and deciding that we're going to open up Japan to American trade. In China's case, Mongol conquest and then the subsequent Mongol collapse. So you have the Mongols conquering China in about 1200, and then that collapse in around 1400 left a weakened empire, which the Europeans began to fill that void. First the Portuguese, and then the British, French and Dutch. Japan, always a resource-poor country, attempted to westernize following the European model of conquest in 1860 to 1945, culminating at the end of World War II in a crushing defeat. One of the things that is kind of unique is Japan transplanted the feudal system, and they used that to implement industrialization, which allowed Japan to rapidly industrialize and modernize, whereas China did not have that system, and so its ability to modernize has been greatly reduced. The communists are now modernizing and industrializing the country, and we'll see what happens from that. Japan's collapse was a direct result of aggression in World War II, which resulted in America and its allies defeating the Japanese. And Japan was occupied for many years. Revolution, expansion, and defeat. So what you see here, the map shows the farthest extent of the Japanese expansion up to and including World War II. So you see these little islands. Japan took this island, was shared. This part up here was Russia. This part, this is, I think, Shackleton Island. This part was Japanese. Korea, the Japanese colonized Korea in the mid-19th century, and then in 1933 began taking parts of China, and eventually took Manchuria and created Manchukuo, and then the eventual invasion of China and the conquest of this region of China here. This was in 1937, and that began a series of American events. China took this largely to gain access to raw materials, or Japan took this from China largely to gain access to raw materials. And once the U.S. saw what was going on, the full-scale war in China by Japanese force commenced in 1937 and led through a series of events. The U.S. began embargoing raw materials, oil, and scrap iron that they were selling to Japan, began embargoing it, and that is what triggered World War II. The Japanese felt like they had to do something, or they were going to be crushed simply by an economic embargo. And so the Japanese attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and triggered the U.S. entry into World War II, which ended up resulting in their total and utter defeat. Now, Japan followed up December 1941, began invading all of this area through here: Indochina, Burma, Indonesia. They seized the oil fields over here, seized the Philippines, went into Indochina. This had been French territory, and since they were allied with Nazi Germany and Italy, they moved in there and took control of this, went into Burma. All of these things happened in 1941 and early 42. Large part took the Philippines, Indonesia, Indochina, Burma, and various South Pacific islands, all this region here, until they got down here to the Marianas and Guadalcanal. The Battle of Midway triggered the end of Japanese expansion and the beginning of the Japanese contraction. That was in May of 42. So the Japanese economic model: Japan's economy recovered to pre-war levels within 5 years after the end of World War II, which is pretty remarkable. And largely it was done because of this keiretsu. So keiretsu is a uniquely Japanese system where you have these investors and they all create and own parts of their portfolio of industries, and they share resources, and various groups will own different parts of this. And so this allows for shared resources and a lot of flexibility in operating, and allows a concentration of wealth that would not have been possible without it. So Japan developed this unique system, and all the members work to create success by sharing business connections between themselves. So they're not doing business with a lot of people outside of this group, and that's what's unique about it. Now we'll do the